Hi, Adam from Coco. Do every week. It's working out to be every week. Do a bit of a longer form monologue about something. Probably I'm going to run out of topics soon. It'll be once a month. But for now, yeah, once a week. So I want to talk a little bit about web versus publishing. And this is a little bit of a kind of very what would you say, sort of homegrown idea. I'm not saying that it's a unique idea. I'm sure there's others have thought about this, probably thought in more clarity than I have, but I'll lay it out anyway. And I'm just owning all the warts and everything in this argument. But my general feeling is that in the history of the evolution of the web, that I've seen it anyway, is that publishing has never really embraced the web. Now, when I say that, it's contentious to start off with, right? Because it should really define your terms. Really mean publishing, capital P publishing, publishers. In my opinion, in self-publishing has really, transformed, obviously, the notion of what a publisher is or what a self-publisher is. But also, I think, in working with Booksprints and things like that, any organisation that prepares documents of any form to share is basically in the publishing game, So organisations that publish are not the same as what I would categorise as a publisher whose business it is to publish things, right? Anyway, so I think the capital P publishers have not really fully embraced the web. And I know that this is generality. Of course there are publishers that have, but in general. And really, I think the situation is that, from what I saw through a historical lens, is that when the web came along, publishers sort of saw the web as a mechanism for sharing content, which was a little bit like the Wild West. It was somewhere where you would throw things into. And it started off, either personal sites or sort of corporate material, things like that. And then, of course, there came along around, I don't even know when it was, 2003, whenever the sort of notion of Web 2.0 was first stamped by Tim O'Reilly and friends. Around that era of social media, era of collaborative content production, era of wikis, Wikipedia, etc. There was kind of like this notion of the generation and sharing of knowledge, which was collaboratively produced, and Wikipedia was one of the mastheads for this. And I think publishers at that time, and I think still probably to a degree, were really shunning this idea. They saw the web as being a place where knowledge was kind of loosely formed, whereas they sort of provided a canonical version of it in one way, in one form or the other, or one format or the other. And without the sort of the publishing stamp of approval or the processes, that the stuff out in the web couldn't be trusted. And there was a lot of contention about this back in the day, early days of Wikipedia, about Wikipedia being trustworthy or authoritative source or not, right? As opposed to what was in those days the Encyclopedia Britannica, for example, which was seen to be trustworthy. And that was a big argument. And I remember actually I've forgotten his name. I wish I could remember it, actually. There was a friend that did a presentation at a Wikipedia conference that I saw. My memory is really fading. And he really talked about the notion of authority of knowledge versus collaboration, right? As being two opposing forces that Wikipedia would have to reckon with. And this is back in 2005 or something that I saw him do this presentation. And the point being that if you value authority of knowledge over participation or collaboration, then collaboration might lose. So you had to choose one or the other. And I think that's to a certain degree maybe proved out with Wikipedia. There's been a lot of sort of over the years, and I'm not a close observer of Wikipedia, but it seems to me there had been for a while a kind of like bit of disgruntlement in the community where newcomers would come along and change pages. And once upon a time that was the way that it worked. But as Wikipedia sort of grew older, they became more concerned about people just making random changes or getting things wrong, right? So authority of knowledge sort of won out against collaboration. A lot of people were deterred because they'd make an edit for the first time and it'd be reversed immediately, right? So I think he was right, but it kind of like highlighted that juxtaposition for me of authority versus collaboration, and you could really reframe those as back in the 2004 years as being the web versus capital P publishing, right? Anyway, so I think that the publishers have tried to sort of hold out against the web to a great degree. And this has actually meant, in many ways, unfortunately, keeping their tools out of the web as well. And I don't know if this is kind of really a symptom of that idea, but it seems connected. I'm not going to say that one caused the other, but it just seems odd to me that that publishing hasn't really embraced these full-on web-based sort of ways of working, which now become mature, and everybody that uses the web understands collaboration. We all get it. Publishing, capital P publishing, hasn't really maintained the tool sets that support that kind of way of working too. The tool sets born in the web, by and large. Once again, just saying that this is generalization. It's not true everywhere. It's unevenly distributed. Anyway, so the question then is like, I think that many people who have been working with publishers have asked is like, when will they make that transition, right? When will they make that transition to the web and start getting rid of the sort of linear processes that I've talked about in earlier discussions, and start looking at more concurrent collaborative processes and looking at how the culture of production changes, the economics change, everything changes when you get to that point. And maybe publishers see that as an economic threat as well. I don't know. And there's also certainly, if you read works by Martha Woodman C and things about the notion of the romantic genius as being, when we think about books, we think about, generally speaking, for example, the single author genius. And that's a romantic construction, right? Which is also a cornerstone for the economics of books, right? So you promote the author as much as you do the works, and the following works will you're leveraging the author's name. So so there's a lot in there, and I'm no expert in it, and there's probably a lot I've said that experts would really disagree with. But enough to say that there have been certain moments recently that have sort of made me feel like capital P publishing was starting to get there, and now I have to take a short little break and just say I'm going to talk about scholarly publishing in particular, right? Because I see scholarly publishing as being even a more staunch holdout against these processes, right, than general publishing. Scholarly publishing, I think, for some reason, sort of really isolates itself even from general publishing. And it has its own processes and language, etc., and tools that it sees as being unique to scholarly publishing, but actually it's not. And I find that idea in itself needs unpacking. But anyway, that's another story. But I want to talk about what I see in scholarly publishing, which is the holdouts of the holdouts against the sort of the web, and how things are evolving there, and in particular, looking at that PRC, which is the publish, revise, curate workflows, which are becoming more popular now. And again, I'm no great historian or anthropologist of scholarly communications, but what I've seen in the last 2 years is that preprints have become much more popular, and this has largely been because people have had a hunger for information about COVID-19 and how to solve that problem. And so there's been a need, a feeling of a kind of like an emergency, and people have shared preprints in a massive volume, right? Whereas before they had not. And this has really, I think, done a world of good for the field of scientific communication, in that preprints have really taken hold in some sectors, and new workflows, well, they're not necessarily new, but there's been a new fashion of workflows, this publish, review, curate. So the publish, review, curate process is basically where you write, some researchers write a manuscript, and where they would otherwise have shared it with or submitted it to a journal, and then it would go through these very sort of walled journal processes where it doesn't see the light of day until it's been fully processed and it's out the other end, and it can take quite some time. That the science, that the raw manuscript is shared very early, and then before it goes to a publisher, and then various self-forming groups within the COVID era have come along and reviewed these preprints, because what they were discovering, and if you'd followed this early on in COVID, what had actually happened was there's a lot of complaints that there were just too many preprints because they hadn't been reviewed by journals, they hadn't been through peer review. So folks thought, how do we get the good from the bad, right? There's just a bunch of stuff. And so how are we going to work through this enormous bunch of stuff, right? It's a bit like being at the end of a fire hose, right? It's just too much information. How do you deal with it? So they started forming these self-forming communities that would do reviews of the preprints. And whereas before you had to sort of be connected to a journal and the journal would organize the reviews, these became communities, right, that would self-select. And this process is kind of interesting because it is sort of breaking down the walls, so to speak, of review, which is one of the gated processes that journals have sort of taken pride and ownership of. It's sort of broken that down, and it's sort of made it web-like, in that the kind of conversations that we're having at the moment with people, organizations that are using Kotahi, which is a platform that Coco has built, is around PRC workflows. Actually, a lot of folks coming to Kotahi because they see the publish, review, curate workflow as being valuable, and they don't have good tooling for it, so they come to us and we walk them through Kotahi. But those folks are really interested in the collaboration. Like every one of them that we've done so far are really trying to work out what collaboration means, right? And how you would work within a web-based tool like Kotahi to collaborate with the community to do reviews of this preprint material, at scale. And to me, this is the start of what looks to be like a kind of like, I should have really thought about better terminology for this, didn't think about it at all, but a kind of like it's the wrong word, but a webification of scholarly processes, right? Where the web was a kind of like, what publishers thought was a kind of a free-for-all, that it never was, and Wikipedia has not really proven that out. It's not a free-for-all. It's not just that you can just create knowledge and it can be full of holes and it gets out there and it doesn't get checked. Those processes do exist, right? There are validation processes, but it's a community-based process as opposed to a top-down managed process. Now, there is some sort of organizational infrastructure in it. It's not that it's without hierarchy, but the hierarchy is just enough to keep it going, right? As opposed to really tying it down and regulating it. And I see that as a real positive. And for those that know this area, I'm not saying anything new. PRC has been around for a while. The name PRC has sort of just generated recently, I think, a new sort of momentum because of COVID. So none of this is new and it's all happening out there, but it's really interesting to see how these ideas are also forming the way that scientific communication workflows are changing. And I'm seeing a lot, once again, around Kotahi, where people are really thinking through all these questions about how do you collaborate, how do you sort of like keep it on the rails when there might be various arbitrary folks involved. How do you make it fair? How do you make it fast? How do you remove all of the resistance so that it can just happen, right? As opposed to what publishers tend to do is tie it down as much as possible, so it can only happen as they say it can happen, when they say it can happen, and with who that they say can do it. So yeah, so it's more open is a very problematic term. It means so much, but it's more of an open process. It's more collaborative. It's more web-like, I would say. And now, of course, we're seeing like journals such as eLife now act as their strategy, and now is to pick up those preprints after they're being community reviewed through PRC. Well, they pick up the last part of the PRC, the curate, pick stuff up, and then they curate it, right? Which is the new role of the journal as they see it, and I think it's a really fascinating approach. And it really is, in my opinion, sort of hybridizing the best of both worlds. It's hybridizing what the review, which is very useful, valuable process that journals have, spent a lot of time refining, and with a more open, collaborative, sort of webby process. So it's really hybridizing those two kind of cultures, I guess. Anyway, it's that's probably a little bit all over the place, my monologue. I hope it makes some sense. I'm sure I've got a lot of it wrong. I'm not an academic. This is just whimsy, my whimsy theory. But it serves me well because it helps us design the tools that sort of meet the needs of these people, and that's of course useful and interesting. So as a framework for me, I find it compelling and pragmatic. Yeah. Anyway, that's enough from me.